We first discovered that he had a problem in late 2000. He was 16 at the time. It started with marijuana and then eventually alcohol. There were some pills, we didn't know what they were, pharmaceuticals of some sort. We got our son into treatment, and while he was getting help, we were getting some education about the disease of addiction, that it was chronic, that there was also could be a genetic component, and that it could be deadly. But we, of course, didn't think anything about that. We just concentrated on supporting our son in every way that we could. We began 2001 with a lot of hope. About 5 months into treatment, he had been doing well, and we had been pleased with his progress. And so he came to us on one day and asked if he could go swimming at a friend's house. We knew the kids he was going to be swimming with, and he'd been doing well, so we decided to kind of lessen the reins a little bit and said, sure. They swam for a while, and then the girls decided to go in and have lunch. David then and his friend went to a nearby drugstore, bought a can of computer duster. David had learned somehow that he could inhale the propellant, which would give him a very brief high, anywhere from 10 to 15 seconds, and it wouldn't show up on the drug screens. I don't think he knew is that in some cases, computer duster can cause something called sudden sniffing death syndrome, a disruption of the electrical activity of the heart, and can also bring on a heart attack. They were passing the can back and forth, taking turns, going underneath the water. And then at one point, David didn't come back up. He'd gone into sudden sniffing death syndrome while he was underneath the water. His body's first reaction naturally was to try and take a breath. He opened his mouth and took in all water. The main cause of death was drowning. The secondary cause of death was sudden sniffing death syndrome. While the EMTs were there, the parents had called my wife. So Marisa drove to the hospital, and by that time, he was already gone. I was actually a couple of thousand miles away in Phoenix, Arizona. I got the call from her saying that he died. I rushed to the airport. This is before 9/11. I basically told the ticket counter what had happened, and they were great. They didn't ask for any documentation or anything. I mean, they could tell that I was distressed, and immediately put me on the first plane directly back to Indianapolis. And so, but that flight was the worst. Just so much going on in my head. The addiction gene ran on my side of the family. I had two uncles who were alcoholic on my father's side, and I was someone who overindulged on a regular basis. I had already pledged to my wife that I would know how to help him and get through this, and I failed at that. Between the grief and the guilt, I began to spiral down myself, drinking more alcohol, and then I began also abusing the antidepressants that I was being prescribed for the grief and the guilt and the depression, to the point where I began shopping doctors for the medications. I had a tragic story. It was pretty easy for me to go to another physician and share the same story and immediately get a script for Xanax. One day, my wife and my son, my other son, my older son, came home and found me in a blackout. And I can still remember coming out of that blackout, seeing, my wife screaming at me and saying, "What the hell is wrong with you?" I said, "I'm in trouble. I've been abusing alcohol and drugs, and I think I need to get help." My situation was so serious that I ended up having to come inpatient at that point in time. Part of the recovery regimen, too, was going to 90 meetings in 90 days, and I ended up doing 180 meetings in 180 days. And I've been in recovery now for 15 years, and I still do 5 or 6 meetings a week. That's the medicine that I continue to take for my disease of addiction. And the dollar that I put in the basket at each of those meetings is a lot cheaper than the prescription drugs I take. I'm an academic by training. Spent 28 years as an administrator and dean at the largest university here in Indianapolis. But a couple of years after I got into recovery, I started kind of a new chapter. I went to the CEO of the treatment center and told her that I'd be interested in getting some professional experience in this field of addiction treatment and recovery. And so we started a parent support group. There's no question that the death of a child is the worst loss. What we found was, we didn't have to do counseling in that group. The counseling took place just by people sharing where they were, what they were struggling with, and then hearing others share exactly the same things in the same way, and found comfort there for the first time. After David died, friends, family, and even people that we hadn't been acquainted with came to us and often started off by saying, "Well, what went wrong?" And sometimes it would be a little more pointed, were there some things that you didn't do? Our children aren't supposed to die before us. It's like a violation of some sort of rule. What went wrong? What could we have done differently? All that kind of mental machination is part of what led to my serious depression. And frankly, trying to find relief from the shame and the guilt, probably more the guilt, again, because the addiction gene ran on my side of the family. He caught this from me. We learn in recovery that acceptance is the release of all hope for a better past. That's become our mantra. And that then has freed us up emotionally and psychologically and brought us to the point where we can help others at least try to work down that path. I describe our mutual recoveries as kind of what a strand of DNA looks like. DNA has 2 trunks. I'm one of the trunks and she's the other trunk. They're separate and distinct, but there are branches periodically that connect those 2 trunks. And that's what recovery has done for us. It's connected us in some marvelous ways. But at the same time, if you look under a microscope, DNA kind of spirals around. That's what life continues to do to us, is that it continues to spiral us around, and we continue to have challenges and things happen to us. But there is still that tightness and structure of us together. The most important thing recovery has done for the 2 of us is that it has allowed us to move on from the worst loss and celebrate our son's life in a beautiful way. My name's Kim Manlove, and this is my story.